The night my daughter-in-law introduced me to her parents as Roger's father. He used to run the landscaping crew. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, shook her father's hand, and looked over at my son. Roger didn't correct her. He laughed a little, actually, like it was a funny detail about me. The crew. As if I'd spent 31 years pushing a mower. I'm 64 years old. I built a civil engineering firm from a $12,000 loan and a drafting table in my garage. At our peak, we had 42 employees, contracts with the county, and a reputation that took me 2 decades to earn. I sold the firm in 2019 for just under $2 million net. I did not drive a truck. I did not push a mower. But that night, at the Thanksgiving dinner that my son and his wife hosted at the house I helped them buy, I was the landscaping crew. That was the moment I should have paid closer attention. I didn't, though. You don't when it's your own son. You make excuses the way you always have. He was nervous. He didn't want to sound like he was bragging about my money. He was trying to downplay things. I told myself all of it. I'm good at that. 31 years of running a business teaches you to manage your own reactions, and I had gotten so good at managing mine that I could convince myself of almost anything. My son's name is Roger. He's 37 now. He has his mother's eyes. She passed in 2014, and he has what I always thought was her kindness, too. I used to say that. Turns out I was wrong about that part. His wife is Cassandra. She goes by Cass. She's 34, and she comes from a family that has money the way some families have furniture. It's just always been there, and they don't think much about it. Her father, Victor, owns a chain of medical imaging centers in the southeast. Her mother, Gloria, volunteers at a museum and wears her generosity like a brooch. They are not bad people, exactly, but they have a way of organizing the world into tiers, and they had decided sometime before I ever met them which tier I belonged to. I met Cass in the spring of 2021. Roger brought her to my house for dinner, and I made pot roast because that's what I know how to make. She was polite. She complimented the house and asked where I'd gotten the dining table. She didn't eat much of the pot roast. I noticed that but filed it away as nothing. They got engaged that Christmas. I gave Roger my mother's ring for the proposal, a simple platinum band with a half-carat diamond that my father had saved for 3 months to buy in 1961. Roger texted me afterward. "She loved it, Dad, thank you." I still have that text. I've read it probably 100 times since everything happened, trying to remember when things were still good. The wedding was in October 2022. Victor and Gloria paid for most of it, the venue, the caterer, the flowers. I paid for the rehearsal dinner, which cost me about $9,000, and I gave Roger and Cass a check for $50,000 as a wedding gift. Cass's parents gave them a condo in Buckhead. I found out about the condo from Roger in passing, the way you hear about things when someone isn't sure how you'll react. I wasn't sure how I'd react either. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't jealous of Victor and Gloria's money. I'd had my own for long enough that it didn't dazzle me anymore. What I felt was something smaller and harder to name. Like I was watching my son be absorbed into a different family, and no one had thought to mention it to me. After the wedding, I started to notice the pattern. The holidays shifted. Thanksgiving at Victor and Gloria's place in Buckhead. Christmas in Destin, at the beach house the Harmons owned. Easter, Cass's grandmother's place in Savannah. Roger and I started having lunch once a month instead, just the two of us at a diner near his office. That became every 6 weeks, then every couple of months. I started to feel like a standing appointment he'd forgotten to cancel. In the spring of 2023, Roger called me. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was on the back porch reading, which is what I do now that I'm not running a company. He said he wanted to talk about something important. He drove over and we sat outside, and he told me he'd been approached about acquiring a small commercial property management firm. A good one, an established one, a company with solid contracts and a team already in place. He'd been working in commercial real estate for 6 years by then. He knew the industry. He needed capital. He said the buy-in was $380,000. He'd been talking to banks but didn't want to carry the debt load of a full commercial loan. He asked if I'd be willing to invest as a silent partner, with a formal agreement, percentage of profits, the whole thing drawn up properly. He even brought a folder with preliminary numbers. I looked at my son sitting across from me on that porch, and I thought about his mother, and I thought about the 30 years I'd worked so that he would have options I never had. I said yes. We had a lawyer draw up the agreement. I invested $380,000. On paper, I held a 40% equity stake in the new company Roger named Harmon Powell Commercial Properties. My name was Powell. Harmon was Cass's maiden name. I noticed that too, but I let it go. The company did well. Within 18 months, they had added 3 major property contracts and hired 4 new staff members. Roger sent me quarterly reports. I read them. I was proud of him. I told him that at our lunches and he seemed pleased. and for a while things felt almost like they used to. Then the lunches started getting shorter. Roger always had somewhere to be. A call, a meeting, a thing with Cass. I'd order coffee after the meal and he'd check his watch. I'm not slow to pick up on signals, but I kept not wanting to believe this one. So I kept ordering the coffee. I kept talking. I kept thinking, he's just busy, he built something, that's good. That Christmas 2024, I was invited to the Harmon's annual holiday party. Victor and Gloria hosted it every year at their house in Buckhead, big place, maybe 6,000 square feet, catered, bartenders, the kind of party where people wear blazers but not ties. Roger called to tell me about it and said it would be a good chance for me to meet some of his business contacts, people he'd been building relationships with through the Harmon network. I drove down from Marietta on December 21st. I wore a sport coat and the watch my father left me. I brought a bottle of 20-year scotch for Victor, which I'd been told he liked. When I pulled into the circular driveway, there was a young man in a red vest taking keys. I handed him mine. Inside, the foyer was full of people I didn't know, dressed better than me, talking about things I hadn't been part of. Someone handed me a glass of champagne. I looked for Roger. I found him in the front living room, laughing with a group of men about his age. He saw me, raised his glass and said, "Dad, good, you made it." Like I was an out-of-town cousin who'd found parking. Then he turned back to his conversation. I stood there for a moment. Then Victor appeared at my elbow. He was cordial. He asked how the drive was, whether I'd found the place all right, whether I was still playing golf. He did not introduce me to the people around him. At one point, a man asked Victor who I was, and Victor said, "Roger's dad." Just that. And the man nodded and moved on. I spent the first hour near the bar, talking to a caterer's assistant who turned out to be studying architecture at Georgia Tech. She was more interesting than most of the room. I told her about my firm, and she asked real questions, the kind people ask when they're genuinely curious. I appreciated that more than I can say. Around 9 o'clock, Cass came to find me. She was luminous that night, I'll give her that. Red dress, hair pinned up, her mother's earrings. She took my arm and guided me toward the dining room. The long table was set for dinner, beautiful candles and centerpieces and little place cards at every setting. I looked for mine. It was not at the main table. There was a smaller table set up along the far wall, 3 chairs, draped in the same linen as the main table, but clearly an afterthought. 2 of her elderly relatives were already seated there, aunts or great-aunts, one of whom appeared to be asleep. My place card was between them. Cass said, "We ran out of room at the main table, but we made sure you had a great spot." She smiled the way people smile when they've already decided you won't make a scene. I looked at the table. I looked at the aunts. I looked back at the main table where 24 people were finding their seats. My son was at the far end next to Victor. He hadn't looked up. I set my champagne glass down on a tray, very carefully. I said, "Tell Roger I had to head out." Cass blinked. "What? Dinner's about to start." "I know," I said. "Tell him I'll call him." I got my coat from the closet near the foyer. I handed the valet ticket to the young man in the red vest. I drove home to Marietta in 47 minutes, which is fast for that stretch of 75 on a Saturday night. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I was 63 years old and I had buried my wife and run a company and paid for a lot of things, and I didn't cry. I drove home and I poured myself 2 fingers of the scotch I hadn't given to Victor, and I sat at my kitchen table and I thought very clearly for about 2 hours. What I thought about was a document. The investment agreement Roger and I had signed specified a 40% equity stake in Harmon Powell Commercial Properties, with my initial investment of $380,000 and a right of first refusal clause that I'd insisted on, meaning if Roger ever wanted to buy me out, he had to come to me first, and we had to agree on valuation. My attorney, a woman named Patricia, actually I'll just call her my attorney. She'd been practicing business law in Atlanta for 30 years, and she'd built in some protections that Roger's attorney at the time hadn't pushed back on, because Roger had wanted the deal to close fast, and I think he assumed the protections would never matter. He was wrong. I also thought about my will. I had updated it in 2020 after my wife passed. The primary beneficiary was Roger, the house, a brokerage account worth about $640,000, 2 IRAs, a piece of commercial land in Cherokee County I'd been holding since 2000. My daughter Yvonne. Did I mention I have a daughter? I probably should have led with that. Yvonne is 31, lives in Nashville with her husband Dale and their 2 kids, and she had always been listed as contingent beneficiary, meaning she'd inherit only if Roger predeceased me. Yvonne had called me on December 22nd, the morning after the party, not because she knew what had happened. I hadn't told anyone yet, but because she called me every Sunday morning, and this week she called a day early. She said she'd had a feeling. That's the kind of person my daughter is. I told her what happened at dinner, the small table, the aunts. Tell Roger I had to head out. The drive home, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Dad, you need to call your attorney on Monday. I already knew I was going to, but it meant something to hear her say it. On Monday morning, I called my attorney. I told her I wanted to review the investment agreement and discuss my options regarding the equity stake. She said she'd been meaning to reach out. She'd received some correspondence from a firm representing Roger's corporate interests about a potential restructuring of Harmon Powell. She'd been waiting for me to bring it up first. I asked her what kind of restructuring. She read me the language. The short version. Roger, through his attorney, was exploring a conversion of the company structure from an LLC to an S-Corp, which would dilute the equity stakes and require all original investors to either convert their position or accept a buyout at the company's most recent internal valuation. The internal valuation, as Roger's team had calculated it, pegged my 40% stake at $312,000, less than what I'd originally invested, based on adjustments for what they were calling operational development costs they'd reclassified. I want to be honest, I don't know if Roger came up with that. I don't know if it was Cass or Victor or some attorney working for the Harmon family who saw a clean way to push me out. I may never know. But someone looked at the agreement and saw a way to get rid of me for less than I was owed, and no one called me to talk about it before sending the letter to my attorney. I told my attorney not to respond yet. I said I'd be in touch. Then I called a business valuation firm, independent. I'd used them years ago when I sold my own company. I asked them to assess Harmon Powell commercial properties based on the most recent quarterly reports Roger had sent me, plus anything available from public filings. They came back 12 days later with a number. My 40% equity stake at fair market value was worth $641,000. The difference between $312,000 and $641,000 is $329,000. I authorized my attorney to respond. What followed was 2 months of quiet, professional, extremely expensive correspondence between attorneys. Roger called me once during this period in February, and I picked up. He was calm at first. He said he was sorry we hadn't been in touch, that things had been busy, that he hoped we could find a resolution that worked for everyone. I asked him if he knew what the independent valuation had found. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the independent valuation used assumptions that didn't reflect the company's actual position. I said, Roger, I want you to buy me out at fair market value. He said that might not be possible without restructuring. I said, then we'll let our attorneys figure it out. I hung up. It was the shortest conversation we'd had in years, and somehow it felt more honest than most of the long ones. In March, my attorney filed for a valuation dispute and invoked the right of first refusal clause, which meant Roger couldn't complete any corporate restructuring without resolving my equity position first. His attorneys pushed back. Mine pushed harder. In April, we reached a settlement. Roger bought out my 40% stake at $598,000. Not the full $641,000, but close enough that my attorney called it a very good outcome. I called it what it was, money that had always been mine, returned. I also updated my will that same month. Yvonne is now the primary beneficiary. The house, the brokerage account, the IRAs, the land in Cherokee County. All of it. I didn't call Roger to tell him. My attorney sent a letter to his as required by certain provisions in the family trust documents. I assume he knows by now. Roger has not called me since April. Yvonne drove up from Nashville in May with her husband and the kids. A girl who's 8 and a boy who just turned 5. We grilled out in the backyard. The kids played in the sprinklers. Her husband helped me fix the gate on the side fence that I'd been ignoring for 2 years. We stayed up past midnight talking, the 4 of us, after the kids were asleep on the pull-out couch. Her daughter has her grandmother's eyes. I noticed it that night more than I ever had before. I've thought a lot about what I should have done differently, and the honest answer is not much. Except pay attention sooner. The Thanksgiving where Cass called me the landscaping crew. The Christmas when the lunch got shorter. The year when my name stopped appearing on anything unless it was a check. I saw those things. I just chose not to see them. The table with the sleeping aunts was the one that finally made it clear, not because it was the worst it wasn't, but because it was public and my son was 40 feet away and he didn't look up. That's what stays with me, not the seating, the 40 feet. I'm not angry anymore. Or I'm not only angry, there's a kind of grief in it too, for the son I thought I was raising, for the future I thought we had, for the dinners we were supposed to have when his kids came along, if they ever do. I don't know what Roger's life looks like now. I don't know if he's happy or if the company is growing or if Cass still plans those beautiful parties in that beautiful house. I genuinely don't know, and some days that surprises me more than the rest of it. What I know is that I woke up this past Sunday morning and my daughter called at 8:30 and I made coffee and we talked for an hour about nothing important. The kids, her garden, a book she'd been reading, a restaurant she and Dale tried last week. I sat on the same back porch where Roger had pitched me the investment 3 years ago, and the light was coming through the trees the way it does in early June in Georgia, which is something I have always loved about this place. I thought about what I had put in versus what I'd gotten out, and I didn't mean the money. I meant all of it, and for the first time in a long time I felt like the math came out in my favor.